In 2015, the median home price in the United States was $283,000. Today, it is 43% increase. That is an 88% increase in 10 years. Over that same period, median household income went from about $56,000 to roughly $80,000. That is a 43% increase. So home prices grew at roughly double the rate of income over the last decade. And that single ratio is the reason buying a house in 2025 is a fundamentally different financial decision than it was 10 years ago. But here is what almost nobody will say out loud. This is not an affordability problem. Calling it an affordability problem implies the solution is saving more, earning more, or waiting for prices to drop. It implies that if you just did a few things differently, the math would work.
It won't, because the math itself changed, and it did not change by accident. So today, we are going to do something the financial media consistently fails to do. We are going to explain exactly what changed, when it changed, and the three structural forces that made buying a house in 2025 a completely different risk calculation than buying one in 2015. Not tips, not tricks, the actual mechanism. To understand how different things are now, you first need to understand what the housing market looked like in 2015. Because 2015 was not a normal year. It was the tail end of one of the greatest buying opportunities in modern American history. And most people who were in their late 20s and early 30s at the time had no idea.
After the 2008 financial crisis, home prices collapsed. The median home price fell from a peak of around $257,000 in 2006 all the way down to $208,000 by 2011. And mortgage rates, already historically low after the Fed cut rates to zero, had fallen to around 3.5% by 2012. That combination, low prices and low rates, created a wealth-building window that was historically unprecedented. A buyer in 2012 or 2013, locking in a 30-year mortgage at 3.5% on a home priced well below its pre-crisis peak, was making one of the most asymmetric financial bets available to the average American household. And the people who took that bet between 2012 and 2019 won dramatically. Home prices rose over 50% nationally in that window. The people who bought early in that cycle doubled their equity while their mortgage payment stayed fixed. Their cost of housing, adjusted for inflation, actually decreased over time while the asset they owned appreciated. That is not the housing market most people are looking at today.
Let's look at the actual numbers side by side, because this is where the difference stops being abstract and starts being impossible to ignore. In 2015, the median home price was $223,400. The average 30-year fixed mortgage rate was around 3.9%. On a standard 20% down payment of $44,600, your monthly mortgage payment on the remaining $178,400 would have been approximately $840 per month. To qualify for that mortgage under standard debt-to-income guidelines, you would have needed a household income of roughly $40,000 per year. The median household income at the time was $56,000, which means the median household earned 40% more than the minimum required to qualify for a mortgage on the median-priced home. Now run the same math in 2025.
Median home price, $420,000. Average 30-year fixed mortgage rate, approximately 7%. On a 20% down payment of $84,000, your monthly mortgage payment on the remaining $336,000 would be approximately $2,236 per month. To qualify under the same debt-to-income guidelines, you would need a household income of roughly $107,000 per year. The median household today is $80,000. Read that again. The median American household earns $27,000 less per year than what is required to qualify for a mortgage on the median-priced American home. In 2015, the median household was comfortably above the qualification threshold. In 2025, the median household does not qualify at all.
That is not an affordability problem.
That is a structural exclusion, and those are two very different things. But the monthly payment comparison alone undersells how different the decision actually is, because the down payment changed too. In 2015, a 20% down payment on the median home was $44,600. Difficult but reachable for a dual-income household in their early 30s with a few years of disciplined saving. In 2025, a 20% down payment on the median home is $84,000. That is $84,000 in cash that has to sit outside the market, outside your retirement accounts, outside any other productive use of capital, just to get to the starting line.
And while you are saving that $84,000, home prices are not waiting for you. At the pace home values have appreciated over the last decade, the down payment target is moving faster than most households can save toward it. So you are not just trying to hit a number, you are trying to hit a number that is actively running away from you. Now, here is the part of this story that goes almost entirely unreported. The reason prices and rates are where they are is not simply supply and demand in the way a first-year economics textbook describes it. 3 structural forces entered the housing market between 2015 and today and fundamentally changed its behavior. And understanding these 3 forces is the difference between thinking this is a temporary problem and understanding why it is a permanent shift.
The first force is institutional buying. Before 2012, institutional investors, large corporations, private equity firms, real estate investment trusts, owned a negligible share of single-family homes in America. Single-family housing was considered too fragmented, too management-intensive, and too illiquid for institutional capital at scale. Then, the same crash that destroyed the housing market created an opportunity. Distressed homes were available at cents on the dollar, and institutional players like Invitation Homes, backed by Blackstone, began buying them by the thousands. Entire neighborhoods, entire zip codes, not to flip them, to rent them permanently. By 2023, institutional investors owned an estimated 3 to 5% of all single-family rental homes in the United States. That sounds small.
But in the specific markets where they concentrated, Phoenix, Atlanta, Charlotte, Tampa, Dallas, their market share in certain zip codes ran as high as 25 to 40% of available inventory. And when an institutional buyer with billions in capital competes with a family with a pre-approval letter, the family loses every time. The institution pays cash, closes in days, and never has a financing contingency. The market was not designed to accommodate that kind of buyer at that kind of scale. And the people who paid the price were first-time buyers who kept losing bids and couldn't understand why. The second structural force is what economists call the lock-in effect, and it is arguably the most underreported housing story of the last 3 years.
When mortgage rates rose from 3% to 7% between 2022 and 2023, something happened that had no modern precedent. Existing homeowners froze. Think about it from the seller's perspective. If you bought your home in 2019 at a 3.2% rate, selling your home means giving up that rate. And buying your next home means taking on a 7% rate on a much higher priced asset. The math of moving simply does not work for tens of millions of existing homeowners. So they are not moving. According to the Federal Reserve, approximately 60% of all outstanding mortgages in the United States carry a rate below 4%. That is roughly 30 million households who are effectively locked into their current homes by the math of their existing mortgage. When those 30 million households do not sell, 30 million homes do not come to market. And when 30 million homes do not come to market, the people who need to buy, the first-time buyers, the growing families, the people relocating for work, are competing over a dramatically reduced pool of available inventory, with nowhere near enough supply to meet demand, which keeps prices elevated, regardless of what rates do. This is why the traditional relationship between rising rates and falling prices broke down. Rates went up, prices did not come down, because the supply never materialized. The lock-in effect absorbed the demand shock and kept prices sticky. The third structural force is the one that was building for decades before any of this started: zoning restrictions and construction constraints.
The United States has not built enough housing to meet population growth for roughly 40 years. The National Association of Realtors estimates the country is currently short approximately 5.5 million homes relative to what population growth and household formation demand. That is not a recent problem. It is the accumulated result of 4 decades of local zoning decisions, permitting delays, construction cost increases, and community opposition to new development. Single-family zoning laws in most American cities effectively prohibit the kind of dense residential construction that would meaningfully increase supply in the areas where demand is highest. Cities that should have built out instead, pushing demand into suburbs and secondary markets without ever solving the fundamental supply deficit. And builders cannot solve this quickly, even if they wanted to. Construction timelines run 18 to 24 months minimum. Material costs are elevated, labor is tight, and new construction, by definition, targets the higher end of the market where margins justify the risk. The 5.5 million home deficit is not going to be closed in 5 years, probably not in 10. So put these 3 forces together and you get the housing market of 2025. Institutional buyers competing with families for a supply that was already constrained. Existing homeowners locked in by their rate who will not sell, and a construction industry that cannot build fast enough or cheap enough to close the gap. None of these forces appeared in the housing market of 2015, or they were present in such embryonic form that they had not yet reshaped the market's fundamental behavior. Which brings us back to the person standing in front of a listing in 2025 trying to decide whether to buy. In 2015, buying the median home meant a monthly payment of $840, a qualification threshold you likely cleared, a down payment that was difficult but achievable, and a market where supply was relatively normal and rates were historically low. In 2025, buying the median home means a monthly payment of $2,236, a qualification threshold that the median household does not meet, a down payment of $84,000 in cash, and a market shaped by 3 structural forces that were not present a decade ago. This is not your parents' decision. It is not even the decision someone made in 2015. The risk profile is different. The wealth-building mechanics are different. The competition you are up against is different. And the financial media's answer to all of this is to tell you to save more, check your credit score, and look in cheaper neighborhoods. That is not an answer. That is a redirect, because the actual answer requires acknowledging that the system changed, that the forces shaping the housing market today are structural, not cyclical, and that the advice written for a different market in a different rate environment with different competitive dynamics does not simply transfer.
Buying a house is still the right decision for many people, but it is a completely different calculation than it was 10 years ago. And anyone telling you otherwise is either not paying attention or has a reason not to say so. So if you want to understand what is actually happening in the financial markets and systems that affect your life, not the version simplified for clicks, hit subscribe. Because this is exactly the kind of story that traditional financial media will not tell you. Not because they cannot, but because it is complicated, and complicated does not sell.